Hello and welcome to Open Mind UFO Radio. I am your host, Alejandro Rojas, and I am here all by my lonesome once again. Martin is busy with some paperwork, unfortunately. Of course, you all know he's a busy guy. He's got his own business, and we probably talk about his business more than you all appreciate. It's just like, I am a big fan of like antiques and history and stuff, and that's what he does. He is an antique appraiser, so he does some really cool stuff. He gets to look at some really cool stuff, and he's off busy right now, so the show must go on, and I've got a lot of news to talk about anyway. But for those of you who don't know, welcome to Open Mind UFO Radio, where we cover credible UFO news and information from a journalistic point of view. So we share with you substantiated information. If we speculate, we call it speculation, whereas the majority of people out in this field, unfortunately, are speculating and just kind of guessing and about stuff. But I like to show and share the real substantiated, real credible information, or at least what mainstream and people out there in the mainstream are doing. So, and there is so much interesting stuff going on right now. In fact, our guest today is called UFO Joe. Joe Murgia is his name. And he is out there posting really cool stuff, just like Danny Silva from the last show. Joe is looking at stories and related to some of the credible stuff coming out, and sharing some of the things that some of us are missing, or he's going to events where some of us aren't, and he reports on that. The other thing that he does that is really, really helpful is that he creates transcripts. So, for instance, I was in Alabama with the Scientific Coalition for Ufology, and Lou Elizondo was there, who used to run the Pentagon UFO program. And Joe has already gone and made a transcript of that whole thing, which is so extremely helpful for people like me who are writing about it, so we can have, written down everything that they've said, which just saves us so much time when we're doing research. So really great stuff that Joe does. So I wanted to have him on the show to talk a little bit about what he is up to, like what he does, how he got into this stuff, just to introduce you all to Joe and his work, because he's someone that I think is really important that you all need to follow. He's a freelance cameraman and director of photography on his own, so he's worked on some cool TV shows and stuff, and we're actually going to be talking about that during the interview. So a great show today. I think you all are going to really, really enjoy it. We have some exciting shows coming up. Oh, that reminds me, by the way, so as you all know, it's expensive to do this stuff, to do these podcasts and to share all this information I do and everything. And there's very little that I get in return. There are some ads that run here on Blog Talk, and so I do make a cut on those. But I've been looking for routes, because I don't want to have to, get some other jobs that take me away from focusing on all of this stuff, and I don't think you all want me to either. So here's what I'm asking you all to. If you can all please, if you can afford it, please become a $1 patron on Patreon for me. Please, I'm asking you to do that because that really helps me out. And here's what I pledge to do for you, because as you all know, if you've been following for a while, I don't ask people to do something for me without giving something in return. So, if you become a $1 Patreon, then I will post early, as early as I can, who my guest is going to be for the following show. And then you can also post your questions for that guest. So here's a little sneak peek. You all know that I've got Lou Elizondo coming up, but I've also got Eric Davis coming up, Dr. Eric Davis. Now, he's a physicist that has worked on all of these programs. So he's worked with Bigelow Aerospace, who got the ATIP project or contract to work with ATIP, the Pentagon, on their UFO stuff. They've also worked for years on other paranormal things, including the wild and crazy Skinwalker Ranch. So we'll be able to ask Eric Davis a lot of stuff about that. If you go to my Patreon, you'll see there's a hidden or a post there about my next guest and asking questions, but you're not going to be able to click on it and submit your questions unless you're a patron. So I apologize to those of you who might be frustrated. Why do they have to charge? But you know what? It's not free for us to do this stuff. And, just like anything, if people can't sustain doing it, then they leave. And there's a lot of people who have had to leave the field or just really severely decline how much they can do because they just don't have the time to do it. So help keep me doing this. And if you appreciate it, I think $1 a month is not very much, right? And that's all I'm asking. So if you become that first level patron on Patreon, links are all over the place, then you'll be privy to this information. I also promise to share with you little interviews and snippets that I talk to. I'm always out there interviewing or hanging out with UFO people or paranormal people. So I'll post on a regular basis just little Q&As or little audio clips when I meet these guys, some questions that you all may have, so that you're going to get some inside information nobody else is going to get. So I'll provide you a lot for that $1 a month. So please do that. That'd be very much appreciated, and you'll be getting a lot of stuff that I think that you want. But before we get to the interview, let's go ahead and I'll continue to give you all of this free stuff that I give, which is including talking about UFOs in the headline. So let's check out UFOs in the news. And there was a lot of news going around. So first of all, I want to talk about some of the posts that I've posted on Open Minds TV. So there's a couple things here that I think are really going to interest you all. So there was some news, and I have kind of an exclusive image, and it wasn't exclusive. It wasn't given just to me. I'm just the only one to post it thus far. But the History Channel provided some information in their press portal about the History Channel's upcoming show that is covering Lou Elizondo and the Pentagon UFO project, and also the To the Stars project. And they're premiering the show on May 31st. So you can see that in the links there on Open Minds. Also, I did a little interview with Lou Elizondo where I asked him about, there are these two terms for this Pentagon project: the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Application Program, ASAP, or ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. What's the difference? Why did the name change? And why is only one of these names or acronyms, why does only one of them appear in the New York Times article? So I'm sure this is a lot of questions that you all have. There are a lot of people that were curious about all of this. So I cleared all that up and wrote that in a little article that I have on Patreon. Now that is viewable for free. I also have a link here on the front page of openminds.tv. So you could check that out. And then I think last week we talked about my other Patreon post that I have out there, 3 items that cast doubt on the study used to close Project Blue Book, and that was really just to show, hey, if there are people out there that are doubting the Condon Report, and the Condon Report was used to close Project Blue Book, there's legit reasons why. There's legit reasons why to doubt the conclusion that Professor Condon came to, that there was no use at studying UFOs. And so I go over that in that article. But these are some interesting things that you'll want to check out. And I guess just to answer that question for you also that I asked Lou about, from ASAP to ATIP is what I call it. Why? Essentially what he says is, and we've heard this from George Knapp's interview and from others, ASAP, which a lot of people don't realize, covered the entire paranormal gamut. So it was investigating a lot of paranormal stuff. This, as we learned first from George Knapp, and is covered a little bit in the New York Times, was because of Skinwalker Ranch. A DIA agent had gone to Skinwalker Ranch. He had a paranormal experience. This was after 2005, so this was after the book came out about Skinwalker Ranch that George Knapp, the journalist and the lead scientist for Bigelow Aerospace, or at the time the National Institute for Discovery Sciences, Colm Kelleher, wrote that book with George Knapp. So the book comes out, this DIA agent wants to to check it out. According to George, there wasn't any paranormal stuff that they had witnessed for a long time at the ranch, but the CIA agent goes out there, has, I guess, this extreme, like, crazy experience. He goes back to Washington, D.C., says Harry talks to Bigelow, and he, according to Reed and the New York Times, approach Harry Reid and say, hey, we have to look into this. Harry Reid says, I agree, and then he goes and gets funding for the project. We know that from the New York Times, but the New York Times said the funding was for ATIP. But we found out the first name for the group was ASAP, essentially. So why didn't the New York Times mention that? Well, it turns out Lou was one of their interviewers, but from what he gathers, the New York Times didn't know that ASAP existed first. And it wasn't Lou's program. Lou didn't join until later on, and he joined ATIP. And so he didn't feel at liberty to disclose ASAP, just ATIP. So he told them about ATIP, so they ran with that. Later on, George Knapp and others were able to release information about ASAP, and there's more out there about it. And I've got links to all of that in this story. The big difference was that, all this stuff, weirdness that was happening at Skinwalker Ranch, and you all, if you've been with me for a while, I've interviewed a lot of people about it. And of course, Jeremy Corbell did that documentary on it recently. A lot of weirdness happened there. And like George Knapp told us, there were a lot of people in the government who, for religious reasons, thought this was demonic and that we shouldn't investigate it. So ASAP was getting a lot of heat. In the meantime, in the background, they decided, well, let's start a less controversial subgroup called ATIP, and that's just going to focus on military UFO cases. So that's the difference. ASAP Paranormal, ATIP is just UFOs or UAPs or AAVs, these other acronyms for UFOs that they've used. As time went on, ASAP kept getting hate from these very powerful religious groups that wanted them not to investigate the paranormal anymore. And eventually, as time went on, ASAP was kind of destroyed. It was gone. And all that was left was ATIP. Then in 2010, Luis Elizondo takes control of ATIP. He moves it to the Office of the Secretary of Defense, where he works. And it continues investigating UFOs, supposedly to this day. Although they've changed their name, interesting enough, and to kind of be hidden for cover. Lou admits this. So they're not called ATIP anymore, but they're investigating UFOs. So the whole strategy to create ATIP is kind of to save the UFO topic, at least, to see if they can pull that out of the program. And if that was going to be less controversial, that they wouldn't, get all the heat that ASAP got, so they can continue doing the UFO work. And it seemed to work because ATIP didn't get canceled or at least attacked like ASAP did. So that's how this all came about, which I think if you look at all the timelines, makes sense. So some people still might have some questions out there, but at least for me, that pretty much clears things up. I might have left some stuff out, some details and things, but it's in my articles there on Patreon, but there's also links to it at my blog, at the UFO Congress blog, and openminds.tv on the front page. So there you go. So that's that story. A lot of fun. But some other news out there. So there's a story from the Star Tribune, and I believe this is in Florida, this paper. But it says why scientists are starting to listen to UFO believers. So this is really cool. And it's essentially because of this Pentagon program coming out. This thing is talking about how, people didn't really listen to UFO people. It covers the Mutual UFO Network. It shows Kathleen Martin, whose aunt was Betty Hill of Betty and Barney Hill, the first publicly, publicized abduction story. And it essentially goes into the Pentagon program and MUFON and how there are more serious people paying attention to the UFO topic. So it's a really good story. I really like it. Let's see what else. We've got a story in the Detroit Free Press, and this is in Bob Lazar Area 51 documentary, Directory Investigates UFO Whistleblower Story. So we've had Jeremy Corbell, this filmmaker, on our show quite a bit, and we'll have him on again because he's a buddy, he's a good guy. And like I just mentioned, he did the Skinwalker movie earlier this year, but he's also done this Bob Lazar Area 51 documentary. So it's getting more attention, even though it's been out for a while. Essentially, I think that one of the reasons it's getting a lot more attention is that they were on Joe Rogan. Or no, they weren't on Joe Rogan, I should say. They want to be. But Joe Rogan has been talking about the movie quite a bit. And I guess he saw it and he liked it. So they might be on Joe Rogan to talk about it. But they were on Larry King not too long ago with Bob Lazar talking about all of this. So, yeah, so the movie's still getting a lot of attention, which is good. So there's this Q&A and this long story in the Detroit Free Press that you all can check out if you like about the film and everything. So it looks like it's going to be part of a film festival out there as well. So exciting stuff that way from our good buddy Jeremy. Here's another one. UFO Fund shuns little green men to buy satellites and rockets. And this is in Bloomberg. So essentially, the ticket symbol UFO is finally being used. And it is being used by for space-related reasons. But unfortunately, it was snatched up before it could cover any UFO-related business in the business field. In fact, what it's going to be looking at is satellites and rockets. So there's going to be a UFO ticker essentially out there for the stock market, but and that's going to be covering different companies in satellites, rockets, and in like the commercial space and everything. So it's going to be a good ticker to watch. But that's kind of interesting that they chose UFO for fun, of course, to cover that stuff. Another story here in mykawartha.com, which is from Peterborough, and I guess this is in Canada. This is a story about a Canadian researcher. So this researcher is a PhD student at Trent University. And he noticed that the Canadian government has a lot of files on UFOs out there. So he decided to do his research on this, to look at these files and to see what they have in them. Now, his interest was not necessarily in the paranormal itself. His interest is to look at how the public and the government interface, or a lack of. So what he says, here's how he describes it. It's a socio-political study about the conflict between citizens and the government in an uncertain post-war period. Sounds very academic, doesn't it? He says it almost has nothing to do with UFOs. It's more about Canadian identity and how they were trying to choose their identity. But he does talk about how there are some interesting cases there. He says that it's pretty much ridiculous. He says, I would find it absurd if life didn't exist elsewhere. So he's convinced there is life elsewhere. However, looking at these files, he says there is no proof that we're being visited from aliens in the files, but that there are some interesting cases. And since this newspaper was in the Peterborough area, they do talk about a couple of the sightings in that area. But this guy seems great personally. He looks like a hard thinker. Of course, I'm partial to the academics that are taking a serious look at this field in many different aspects. So I applaud this guy. In fact, I'm going to hunt him down and try to get him on the podcast at some point. But his name is Matthew Hayes. And of course, you'll find this link at the front, on the front page of openminds.tv. We also have another article from Mr. Luis Elizondo himself. He's been writing some articles on Medium, as you all know. Mostly these are kind of opinion pieces about his perspective and why we should be kind of more open-minded and kind of really essentially more intelligent when we think about UFOs and stuff like that. And that's the nature of this story as well. Stop thinking about UAPs in black and white. So essentially what he's trying to say is that we don't necessarily need to say they're aliens or not aliens, that we need to be a little more intelligent about how we're looking at this. We need to follow the data and look at things and kind of that there's a lot of stuff out there. So there could be many different things, more than one solution to every problem. There could be a lot going on here when it comes to this topic, rather than just aliens or not aliens, instead of this just A or B kind of thing. So yeah, so we've got to really check this out. This is a great article by Lou on Medium. Oh, and here is something else that's really interesting. So you might have been seeing this going around online. And it is interesting. I mean, I think it's a little bit jumping to conclusions, but there was a panel in the Congress. They had a hearing about the Space Force. So as I've talked about, we already have a U.S. Air Force Space Command, and they want to create a new Space Force or Space Command. And so what they've decided to do is, instead of having it its own branch of the military, for now having it under the Air Force to be headed by the guy who heads U.S. Space Command. So I'm not sure. I still am unclear on the difference between our current Space Command and what this new one will be doing. However, there have been some hearings, and one part was very interesting. So Senator Blumenthal, he's a pretty important guy, and we see him on the news quite a bit talking about various things. He's on the CNN quite a bit, but Senator Blumenthal, he is a politician from Connecticut. He is a Democrat, but was on this panel saying that we need to tell the public more about this, what we're doing here. He says, we know what we're talking about in this group, about the reasons we need this and the threats that we're facing. And he talks about how big these threats are. But he says the public doesn't even have context for this information because we're not sharing enough with them. He says our adversaries know that we know what they're doing up there. And they know that we know, but we're not talking about it to the public. Even though we're having these closed-doors conversations about it, we really need to inform the public about the threats that we're facing. And so people are like, what? Is he talking about UFOs? There's this whole, we know that some of these witnesses to the extraordinary 2004 Nimitz case that the carrier group had experienced, the Nimitz carrier group experienced. These witnesses we know have talked to some of these congressmen and Congress people about what they saw, and there is some interest in, studying this phenomena because of that. Is that what he's talking about? That's a little assumptive. He does say adversaries, and we do know, of course, our big adversaries are China and Russia, and we do know China has launched a missile and blown up a satellite that's actually caused problems and could have debris hit the ISS actually as part of the problem. So we don't know what he's talking about, but there's a lot of ideas out there that he's talking about aliens or UFOs or something. So I just wanted you to make you aware of it, but he's very concerned in this clip, and it's kind of scary. So you might want to watch the clip. Otherwise, Mysterious Universe, it's a great website. It's not necessarily a mainstream website, but it's a great website with paranormal and UFO stuff. And they've always got some really good stories, and they've got great writers there. One of those great writers is Micah Hanks, the brother to the guy that does the music for the show, actually. Micah Hanks, of course, we've had on the show. He's got his own great podcast, the Gralien Report. But he's got an article here talking about Senator John McCain and how John McCain has been into UFOs. So he's got a clip from George Knapp where George Knapp said, he had talked to John McCain about UFOs. Harry Reid had talked about talking to John McCain about UFOs. In the past, we know, and I interviewed, John Burroughs, one of the witnesses to the Rendlesham case from the UK. He had John McCain's office help get his military records out because for some reason they were classified. A really interesting story. Again, you can find that in Open Minds. But some great stuff that he has covered in this story about John McCain's interest in UFOs. Good one. In another story on Mysterious Universe this week, it's called Mysterious UFOs Return to Manitowoc and the Lake Michigan Triangle. So there's been a triangle UFO sighted around Lake Michigan, and I guess it was also seen again recently, and there's an online blog that someone told us to, and they wrote a report about it. I don't have time to go into it because we're almost out of time for this segment. I also want to talk about, here's some UFO Congress news. Dr. Michael Masters and time traveling. So Dr. Michael Masters is another professor And he's interested, teaches anthropology. He's interested that he thinks, some of these UFOs might be us from the future. A really interesting idea. So Kevin Randall, most well known for his Roswell research, a great researcher. He's been on the show a few times. He interviewed Michael Masters, and I think it's a really great topic. And this gentleman, Michael Masters, is going to be speaking at the UFO Congress this year. And here's a little sneak peek for you all. If you go to the speaker page for the UFO Congress, you're going to find a few there. So we're getting ready to release our tickets and release more about speakers. So otherwise, let's see another couple stories. Ultimate Guitar has stories about some musicians who believed in conspiracy theories. This you might find interesting, especially because they do talk about Tom DeLonge, but they talk about a couple other people who believe in, reptilians and stuff like that. So that's kind of an interesting story. And then finally, Marty Wilde. You guys know Marty Wilde, don't you? Don't worry, if you don't, I didn't either. So this is I guess, a singer from way back when, but he's also been really into UFOs. And the Mirror, the UK tabloid, did a little feature on him because he's turning 80. And they asked him about his UFO interest, so you'll have to check that out. So there you go. There's the news. You can find this all on the front page of openminds.tv. But we're out of time for this segment. Coming up right after this break, we'll be talking to Joe Murgia, so stay tuned. Welcome back to Open Minds UFO Radio. I'm your host, Alejandro Rojas, and I am excited to have on the show for the first time, Joe Murgia. Did I say that right?
You said it perfectly.
Awesome. I like to get it right. Of course, very few can say my name perfectly, but that's fine. I don't mind too much.
Same here. It's very rare for anybody to get my name right just looking at it.
And just for full disclosure, I had heads up. I did ask about the pronunciation first, so I didn't just amazingly get it right off the bat. So I wanted to bring you on the show because you're doing great stuff. You've got this website, Ufo Joe, a Twitter account, and you're transcribing a lot of the interviews out there that TTSA and ATIP people are doing. And it's a great service, but you're also kind of paying attention to other stories out there. And just like Danny Silva, who we had last week, you're catching up on items that I think many others are missing because there's just so much information.
There's so much going on. First of all, thanks for having me on the show. I'm happy to be here. And I mean, there's so much going on that I can't keep up. So I'm so glad there are people out there like Danny and so many others doing the work. And it's just, it's like a bombardment. After the last couple of days, I've taken a break because I can't keep up. Yeah. And it gets a little frustrating. It's great, but you can't keep up and people want to know. So, yeah.
Especially because you've got people know what you do. And so when something happens, I even see up there, we've got to wait for Joe. We're waiting for Joe's transcript. Joe, where's the transcript? And so people are kind of excited for you to get that out there.
Yeah, the pressure is on. But I mean, I love transcribing because it's a really great way for me to learn more details. And I don't have the best memory. So me going over something multiple times is really good for me.
Right.
And some of the people I transcribe, like Elizondo and Knapp, it's just a pleasure just to listen to them. Those are two of my favorite people. So listening to them talk and getting new details is it's fun. It's fun for me.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about that so much, but I want to first get into you. So we'll get into some of that because I agree with you 100%. But, I want to introduce you to my audience as well. So I'm curious kind of your background. So when did you first get interested in this topic?
So my first memory is the early 70s. I went to the theater and saw a Bigfoot movie called The Legend of Bogey Creek. And it was a docudrama. So basically it was like they portrayed it as a documentary, but it was with actors. But then the first movie, it was a double feature, and the first movie was a UFO documentary. Now, I don't remember exactly the details. I just remember I was intrigued. I had never seen anything like that. I was young. So really, really enjoyed that. But next, In Search Of. Do you remember the show In Search Of?
Oh, yeah, I love that show.
I loved that show, and I watched it. And then 1977 came, and I went to the theater to see Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and that was it. I mean, I loved that movie so much. And the thing was, though, I didn't pursue it at all. I mean, I was young, but I didn't know people studied this. So I saw the movie, and that was it. And then over the years, I read some occult books, stuff on out-of-body experiences, but not once did I ever come across a book on UFOs. I just wasn't looking in the right place. But then 1996 comes around, and I have a close friend, and she goes, I have an aunt. I don't remember how this subject came up. She goes, I have an aunt that had an encounter with that being on that book. I'm like, what book are you talking about? And she goes, I think it's called Communion. So I'm like, okay. So I started reading Communion, and I had no idea it was the beginning was, for me, it was frightening. I had no idea what the book was about. So it really scared me. So one night I said, I'm not sleeping in my room. I'm sleeping on the couch. I'm going to sleep on the couch. I'm going to sleep with the lights on. Next thing you know, I wake up in the middle of the night. I'm frozen there. I can't move. I'm paralyzed. I'm like, uh-oh, the aliens are coming to take me. I can't believe this. So it was scary. I think it was either, depends on who you talk to. It's either the beginning of an out-of-body state or it's sleep paralysis. So I got out of it, and I woke. I'm like, I'm not gonna read this book anymore. I don't need this. This is too scary. So I put it down. A few days later, I said, I'll start reading again. So I read it, and then I said, he talks about life after death, reincarnation, telepathy. There's so much more to this than I ever thought. So I finished reading it. I read his 2 other books. I went to the bookstore, and then that just started me down the rabbit hole. I mean, I read every metaphysical book I could get my hands on, channeled books. I had no discernment. Everything I read, I believed. And just over the years, that changed. But back then, it was just nonstop reading. And that's basically how I started getting into the subject.
That's cool. What I love about people that are more my age getting into this is that when we talk about this sort of thing, it makes more sense. So, for instance, like when I got in this, let's say 20 years ago, a lot of the people I was working with, they were older. So when they're talking about, we're talking about Close Encounters, by then they're already working with Hynek and everything,
Right.
But it's cool to talk to someone who was a kid when that came out, like me, so I can really identify that. For me, Close Encounters was huge too. But fortunately, I did not come across the Communion book because that would have scared the heck out of me.
Yeah, it was not something I was expecting. But I mean, that book really changed my life. I mean, it just got me going, and I've seen Strieber speak over the years. Actually, I went to L.A. last year late and saw him speak, and he's still a great speaker, and I love his work.
Yeah, he's kind of funny because when he spoke at the Congress at first, I asked him to speak. He's like, nobody wants to hear from me. And it was kind of weird. And I'm like, are you kidding? And he's like, no, nobody wants to hear from me. And I'm like, yes, they do. And so even at the conference, when he was backstage, he's like, is there anybody even out there? I don't think people like me very much. And I'm like, it's packed. I had him take a peek. I was like, look out there. It's packed. People want to see you. You're one of the headliners of the show. And he's like, he was shocked by that.
Same thing. After his lecture, and it was at somebody's house in Malibu. So it was like about 20 people. So it was really intimate, which I loved. But afterwards, I went up and I said, where else are you speaking? He's like, nobody wants to hear me speak. So nowhere. I'm like, I had the same response. I'm like, yes, people do want to hear you speak. And there are a lot of people who have not been exposed to his material. So, and I don't know what happened to him. He's pretty open-minded about not coming to a conclusion about his experiences and what they represent. But yeah, I think he's extremely important to the topic.
So that's pretty interesting. The sleep paralysis is interesting too. I've had that on a couple of occasions, and luckily I was old enough I knew what it was, but it was certainly very coincidental for you.
It was, and that subject, the out of body subject, is something I really became obsessed with. I read books on it and tried to go out of body. Did not have any success, but yes, it was definitely coincidental, and it's something that, once again, it changed my opinion on everything. It got me going down a different path that I would not have gone down if I had not read that book and had that experience.
So forward 2 years later, and all this news comes up: Pentagon secret program, Tom DeLonge, getting involved with UFOs. What's with this crazy rock star dude? What encouraged you then to start up your website and to start getting involved with transcribing this information and sharing it?
So I'll pick up around 2000, the year 2000. I was a subscriber to Michael Lindemann's newsletter. Remember Michael Lindemann?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I knew his wife very well.
Yeah, Deborah, right?
Mm-hmm.
I loved his work. So he was telling me that, and I started doing my own thing, my own little newsletter email list. It was called Open Mind News, Alejandro.
Oh, you stole our name. I won't let our boss know.
So it was around 2000, and I was 2 years away from a pension at the City of Tampa Television, and I quit my job 2 years short of a pension to pursue my newsletter because I thought the subject was so important. So I did that, and Michael Lindemann was just getting out. He was just retiring, going into something else. So I did the newsletter, and I didn't pursue it hard enough, so I had to go back into television around 2002. So, between then and 2000, I kind of lost interest. I read a lot of UFO books, but I kind of lost interest because it was nothing new. I'm like, okay. Back then, I thought, the year 2000, we're going to have disclosure, and then I realized, it's not going to happen anytime soon.
What convinced you of that?
I was just naive back then. It was just I had just gotten into it, and I'm reading some of the books, and people are predicting this, and then the whole year 2000 craze. I'm like, it's going to happen. It's got to happen. This evidence is so clear cut that something's interacting with us, and then it didn't happen. And then eventually, I lost interest, and it's like, okay, how many UFO reports can I read about? I'm like, so it stopped until I started hearing about Tom DeLonge. And the first time I heard DeLonge, I was like, you know what? I don't believe him. I don't believe this guy. I don't. And then something happened. I went back and listened to another interview, and then the WikiLeaks stuff happened. I'm like, okay, let me give it a second listen. And then the New York Times, I heard about stuff was about to come out. It came out, and it was like everything. The passion was back. I was like, this is what we need. These are credible people. We need pilots coming out. The former head of a UFO program, and people were, people around me still weren't interested. But for me, it was like, all right, this is it. I'm going to start a website again, get it going again. I'm going to get on Twitter and be more active. And that was another, jump start for me that really, once again, changed things for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, what, I guess, were you seeing out there? So obviously you felt, hey, there's a gap. There's not enough coverage of this, so I'm going to get involved. Is that true?
I don't know if it was me looking at coverage. It was just me so passionate. I'm like, I need to get this out. This is stuff I want to share. And some of the stuff I was doing, like transcripts, was not being done. And there was a lot of, I did a podcast before the New York Times article came out, and the skepticism of every guest that I was with, they were so down on DeLonge that nothing's coming from this. This is a waste of time. It's Tom DeLonge. And I was like, yeah, I think maybe we should wait to see what happens before we start making judgments. And then when it happened, I'm like, it just gave me that push. It was almost like I wanted to show these guys, listen, you jumped the gun, you were wrong. And it just started me to write about it. And the more I learned, the more I got excited. And now I can't wait for the History Channel show to come out and to see what TTSA and some other groups that are going, working on this, what they can bring. It's just like a new day in ufology.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I think you're exactly right. And that's what's fun about people like you and Danny and others kind of coming out and getting involved, because it's like a new, breath of fresh air, as the old and stagnant, sticks to its what it's done for years and kind of continues this path, almost ignorant of the exciting things that are happening.
I don't get it. There are people, I'm not going to name names, but we know people that are saying that ATIP and OSAP did not investigate UFOs. I'm like, so basically, Harry Reid is coming out saying he started a UFO program, and he's lying about that for what? So he can be labeled as the UFO senator? Why would he do that? It makes zero sense that Reid would talk about saying it's a UFO program, and then you have to say Elizondo's lying, and Chris Mellon is lying, and they're all lying.
And Putoff and Bigelow and the whole Bigelow organization. And
it makes zero sense. And a Harry Reid story, So I'm a cameraman. I'm a freelance cameraman, and I get calls for different kind of jobs. I shoot sports, reality TV, conventions, and then somebody emails me about 3 weeks ago, and they go, "Hey, I got the shoot for you. It's a local politician, and we need to. He just needs to do a thank you video. Are you available?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So they tell me the date, and then a couple of days before, they go, "You're going to be shooting Senator Harry Reid." So I'm like, "Oh, okay,
Wow.
great." I was like, "That's a coincidence." So I shot it, and then after the interview was over, I said, "Can I ask you about the UFO program?" He goes, "Yeah." So
Cool.
that'll be on my website real soon.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, it's not a long interview. I didn't push. It was like 6 minutes I had with him, and I didn't push it. But he said, I asked him about Congress and how much progress he's made about getting them interested in hearings, and it's a decent little interview.
Is this on camera?
No, he did not want to go on camera, so it's just a transcription.
Still, that is awesome. Way to go. Good job on that.
Yeah, thanks. It was a fortunate break to get that interview.
And how did he come across? I mean, did he come across a little hesitant, or was he just very nice and open?
At first, I thought he was hesitant because he's like, "I don't want to do this on camera." I'm like, "Okay, can we just regular interview, no camera?" He's like, "Yeah, that's fine." And then, his passion comes out. He's definitely frustrated. The main thing he brings up is the stigma. He's like, "I have a really hard time getting, people in Congress interested because of the stigma." Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter. And I was like, maybe some of the younger people. He's like, "No, it doesn't matter. Age does not matter. It's still a stigma, but we're making some progress." And people should check it out. I even asked him about Bob Lazar because so many people are like, "What does Harry Reid think about Bob Lazar?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm going to ask him."
Well, and there was an interview recently, maybe even in your transcript, where George Knapp said Harry Reid was one of the first people, like the first person he went to once he heard about Bob.
Right. And then there are people out there saying Harry Reid's not interested in UFOs, and they've never spoken to Harry Reid. So as George Knapp pointed out, so I don't understand that.
Yeah.
None of us know Harry Reid. Now we know more because George Knapp has shared some of the stories of how Harry Reid became interested and how they shared information. But at the time, I didn't know that. Nobody knew that. And people would just jump, people are speculating, which once again, I don't understand that.
Yeah, and I think one of the hard parts is, okay, some of this we do have to rely on the word of George Knapp. However, he's very, very credible. He's an award-winning journalist. He handles his witnesses and the credibility of the information very professionally, and there's no reason to doubt George Knapp. Exactly.
He's the reason. Like with the Bob Lazar story, which I'm skeptical about, and like you said, you're in the middle, or you're in the gray basket. Right. The only reason I stay interested in that story is because of the credibility of George Knapp, and you're exactly right. Same thing with Skinwalker. People are like, well, it's only anecdotal stories. I'm like, yeah, but it's the people who are telling the stories, and the person who investigated is an award-winning investigative journalist. And yes, I take his word, and I trust him, and he's definitely a big part of the story and the reason why I'm so interested. And we need to have data and evidence, but for now, I'm comfortable taking his word for a lot of this.
Mm-hmm. And what a lot of people miss when it comes to Skinwalker, because I can see those people, well, there's not even any data. These guys were scientists, give us data. All we have is anecdotal. But the experiences people had on Skinwalker are responsible for OSAP and ATIP. And I don't think people get that.
No, and people are still saying, it's the whole mistrust of the government and military industrial complex. And yes, I understand that. But, a funny side story with my television career, one of my bosses always made fun of my UFO stuff. I worked on different shows with him. Now he's trying to pitch a show about UFOs with a UFO personality, which I won't name. And I worked on Pawn Stars for 7 years. He was one of my bosses on that show. And then another boss on another show is involved with Skinwalker Ranch and that show. So it's like, I'm working on reality TV, and these guys are both working on UFO shows. Kind of ironic.
That's hilarious. So you are working on a reality TV show now?
I mean, I work on 90 Day Fiancé. I've worked it for the last year. It's a drama show. It's like the #1 TLC show. And
yeah, I'm very familiar with it, for better or worse.
Yeah, I'd rather not be working, but right now it pays the bills and it's not that bad. It's definitely close. It's very it's documentary style. So I do like that.
Yeah. That's interesting. So, getting back to Harry Reid, can you share his thoughts on Lazar? Or do you want that to hold that information for your release your article?
Basically, he's in the middle. He's like, some of the story it rings true to him, and some of it he doesn't know. And he shared a story that he wanted to relate to the Bob Lazar story. I don't have it on me memorized, but people will see it. It's a little story compared to some. I can't even remember what it is, but he's in the middle. He's in the middle.
Yeah. Yeah, so like the rest of us, and probably George Knapp is very influential to his decision on that, just like it is for me and apparently you as well.
Oh, George Knapp is a huge influence on I even got interested in that case. I never really got too interested in Lazar and did much reading on it until I started hearing about Jeremy Corbell's documentary coming out, and then watching some of George's lectures on Lazar. And I found certain things that I'm like, okay, yeah, I don't know, that doesn't make any sense to me. But I don't know if we'll ever find out the truth about Lazar, but it's definitely it's an interesting and fun story to read about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jeremy's. I think I very much like Jeremy's work also. And, they are friends, and especially Jeremy. And, when I talk with George and Jeremy about Lazar, they know I'm skeptical, and so I have that attitude. But, of course, they know I also respect them and their work and what they have to say very much, too. But that's kind of another odd end of it. And because I'm taking it easy on these guys because they're my buddies. But we do have kind of like politicians at professional where we know what our roles are. We have to be honest above anything, even friendships. And we all understand that.
It's tough because this subject, it's not like there's that many people in those positions that are interested in it. So right. you're automatically going to become friends with people. And it's tough, to balance friendship with, being skeptical, but that's where we are. It's not like there's a 1,000 reporters out there covering this. Hopefully in our lifetimes we'll see that. But for now, I mean, George Knapp is the guy, as far as top reporters. And if you make friends with him, then it's hard not to, because he's such a likable guy. So you're stuck in the middle. But I don't really, it doesn't really bother me, especially since, his background, his credibility speaks for itself.
What about, you said your favorite people to listen to are George Knapp and Lou Elizondo. What about them in particular do you appreciate?
I just love George's style, his humor, sticks to the facts. Elizondo has yet to, I know there's some details about how the program started and how the videos got released that are, we're learning about. But as far as people saying he's spreading disinfo or skeptical of that, what has he said that's controversial? Our military has been engaging with objects that are unknown to us. That's basically what he says. That's basically what he's been saying. So how is that controversial? I mean, he's behind some big, the government's trying to trick us into what? Into believing that our guys and military guys and girls are interacting with unknown objects? We already know that. It's just now we're getting more data, we're getting videos. So, and his lecture at the SEU, which I'm almost done transcribing, it was fantastic. I mean, I think he's the modern day without the astro, he doesn't have the same degree as Hynek, but he's kind of like for me, he's the modern day Hynek. He's that credible person. He's the go-to guy. He's the face, like I said, he's the perfect face of the franchise for TTSA. That's the guy you want out front.
Yeah, and I think his likability has worked against him in that everybody wants to hear from him because I feel, and he always says no, but he's very good at presenting. Like, you heard the SEU presentation. He's like, how was that? Was that okay? And it's like, dude, you're great. I know that you don't want to be the spokesperson for TTSA. That's not what you signed up for, and that's kind of what you've become. But you did great. I mean, like you said, I mean, he's a great presenter, right?
He's a great presenter, and he's very likable. And people are like, well, that's because he is a counterintelligence agent, and that's what he's known. That's what he's good at. He's good at tricking people. I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. Like I said, if he said something controversial, like DeLong says controversial stuff, Elizondo does not. Elizondo sticks. I mean, they made a couple of mistakes with the Washington photo and the balloon that was connected, to the article online by Paco Chichirio, the one who first put the Tic Tac article online. But it's like, for the most part, and I know they've had problems with public relations, but for the most part, I love everything they're doing. And I'm a little worried about the History Channel show because I've worked on so many shows. But let's see. The real goal is, will it convince more congressional people to get on board and push for open hearings or push for more funding.
We're out of time, so we're going to take a short break, and then we'll come back and talk more about this. But for those of you listening on the radio, you're going to hear a commercial break. For the rest of you, you'll hear a short musical interlude, and then we'll be back with Joe Murgia, UFO Joe, on Open Mind UFO Radio. Welcome back to Open Mind UFO Radio. I am your host, Alejandro Rojas, and I have with me UFO Joe, also known as his given name, Joe Murgia. And before we went to the break, we were talking about Lou Elizondo. And, people, whether they want to doubt me or not, that's fine. But, and everybody knows, and even, in my conversations with Lou, when I'm like, he's questioned, well, is that accurate? You know what I said? And I'm like, well, here's my sources. This is what they said. And sometimes somebody goofs and they didn't say it accurate. And I'm getting clarification from Lou. And of course he feels bad for that other person or whatever, or if he's goofed in the past, but I haven't found in any of it, but I will call out when, well, this person said this. Is that true? Ooh, maybe that's not quite right. But I haven't found looking any major glaring discrepancies or signs of deception. And what's interesting as time goes on is all of the pieces fit, especially what Lou's told us. Lou says this and this and this was the case. We don't have evidence of that. But then all of a sudden, stuff starts to appear and it's just like Lou said it was.
Right. I mean, and people are just waiting. There are people waiting for one mess up. It's like, oh, there it is. I told you he's not to be trusted. So, yeah, he's done a great job. I mean, I never thought that somebody like him would be coming out speaking. Like George Knapp said at his lecture in UFO MegaCon, he's like, so Elizondo steps on the stage, says, yep, I ran a UFO program in the Pentagon. It's real. And there was no response. The media it was October of 2017. And I was like, and I remember George Knapp going on Coast to Coast saying he had this long open, how amazing it was. And it's just, people were like, yeah, nah, don't care. And that's another thing. When the New York Times article came out, I told a lot of friends and family about it. And maybe one or two were like, that's really interesting. But for the most part, it's, once again, yeah, no response. I don't care. But what that article and Elizondo coming out have done for me, whenever I encounter somebody new, if I'm taking an Uber ride and I see a little opening, I'm like, so did you hear about the New York Times article in the Pentagon UFO program? They're like, no. And then, we start up a conversation. Usually they'll change the subject, but not always. So that's another thing. I remember Diana Pasulka said the same thing for her. She says, now I can refer to that New York Times article and it gives it credibility that we've never had before. So that's a great thing.
Yeah, exactly. And for those of us who engage with the mainstream media, it's more tools in our toolbox to say, well, the Pentagon looked into it and took it seriously, and here's what the guy who ran that program says.
Exactly. And I know people are, skeptical of the New York Times because the way they've treated the subject over the years, but that's not the way they treated it in this particular article, and that's what's important right now. I'm not going to talk about the last couple of decades, and they've done some. Washington Post too. They've done some really good articles on UFOs and some not so great articles. But having the Washington Post, Politico, and New York Times do a 3-prong, bam, here it is. It was great. 'Cause it wasn't just one outlet.
Right. So I want to get into some of the stuff that you've written about lately. So, of course, there's a 2004 Nimitz case. And recently at UFO Congress, they had quite a few of the witnesses together. And you wrote, your latest is confirmation. Second witness also says he saw longer tic-tac video and was told sonar contact occurred. So let's talk about that. Who said that and why is that significant?
So Jason Turner, who was on board, I believe, the Princeton, he said that he went in, I think it was I'm not sure exactly where it was, I don't have it memorized, but he said he sat down and watched it live. He said he watched it live in one of the consoles, and it was anywhere from 7 to 10 minutes, and the object was doing all kinds of crazy maneuvers. And he said when you see the object start, the video we've seen, the tic-tac, where it starts and goes off the screen, he said that's the beginning of the video. Right after that is where the good stuff happens. So he was the only person who had said that until Gary Voorhees, who was also on board. He said he saw the same video. So we have two guys saying they saw an extended video of the tic-tac. And George has said, or Jeremy has said, that there are more videos out there, but they haven't addressed that particular one because David Fravor basically has not said anything like that. He's the pilot of the F-18 who encountered the tic-tac. He said it was, the video he saw was, well, it wasn't his video. It was the guy who went up, Chad Underwood, 2 hours afterwards. But this was the first time I had heard there was a longer video when Jason Turner said that. So, I mean, two guys, it's not proof. We need to actually see the video one day. And at UFO MegaCon, George Knapp said that he had heard there was a 20-minute video out there, but I asked him afterwards if he was talking about the Tic Tac case. He said, no, it wasn't the Tic Tac case. So I don't know what case he's talking about, but I would love to see a 20-minute video. And that panel was great. The military panel was Kevin Day, Jason Turner, PJ Hughes, and Gary Voorhees, and got to hang out with those guys a little bit before and after. And I can't remember. I think I was sitting next to somebody and they said, this is historic. I've never been to a UFO conference where 4 military witnesses are speaking about an event they experienced. So yeah, that was really something I had never experienced.
Mm-hmm. Which is important. And I think we have to remember to categorize things that, we have people who are essentially, sympathetic or who are on board to help release information, and we have people that aren't on board to release information. And I think it's important for people to categorize because, of course, we have Lou and we have his group. Harry Reid, luckily, he didn't have to. He could have said, yeah, I was involved with that, but I don't want to talk about it. He doesn't have to do all these interviews. Luckily, Harry Reid's on board to help out. There's Lou. There's some of the Bigelow staff. A lot of them are completely quiet, kind of keeping under the radar.
Right.
And then we have witnesses, and we're fortunate to have an abundance of witnesses in this case who are helpful. But it's important to know the DOD is still not on board. They are not really releasing or sharing information. In fact, it seems apparent that they are releasing some information that might not even be accurate. Time will tell. And then we have the witnesses, but not the military. So when we hear about these videos, it's kind of like, well, why can't we see them? We've seen some of them. We don't even really know the behind the scenes on how those 3 videos got out, but it's a monumental effort, and it's probably highly doubtful we'll see the other videos unless maybe Congress or something gets involved, because they have been unwilling to share anything. I've got a host of FOIAs out there, and they have not responded to any except to say we're really busy.
Right. Well, and I'm amazed that some of the people take, and I'm not saying they're outright lying. Like as Elizondo has said, he just doesn't think the left hand knows what the right hander is doing.
Right.
It's such a huge bureaucratic mess. But then George Knapp at UFO MegaCon said, and I have this quote, it says, in the past with Blue Book, quote, they lied. And they're lying now. When they said the program is over, it's not over. It's still ongoing. In fact, there's more than one, end quote. So it's like, yeah, he's using the L word there. I don't know if they're lying, but I definitely don't take their word when they say something, especially with the whole aviation, aerospace. Oh, yeah, it's aviation. It's aviation. And then, oh, no, it's aerospace. They were wrong. Sorry.
That's a good point. There's one point where they were wrong. But then again, if we go through history and we look at cases, Stephenville, they were wrong. They had to correct themselves. They said one thing, and then they came out and said, oh, sorry, we were wrong, and said another. O'Hare was similar, but that was more with the FAA saying, no, we didn't receive any reports. And then when the Chicago Tribune gets involved, oh, yeah, we did have reports. So, I mean, unfortunately, with these PR groups, lying is kind of common, and which is kind of interesting because, one of the people who's been lied to the most by these groups is John Greenwald, who's got, done so many FOIAs, although for some reason he doesn't think he's getting lied to in this case. But we'll see, because, yeah, they say they didn't release those videos. Many have seen the paperwork that shows that they have, although that hasn't been released. But the New York Times said they verified it, that they verified, yes, indeed, the DOD.
Right, and then Eric Davis, he didn't contradict, but he got into more details on another podcast where he said Elizondo worked with a specific group or a specific department within the Pentagon. So maybe that group, he got them cleared to them and nobody else knew that was going on. Maybe that happened and they're kind of feeling burned by that. I don't know. But yeah.
I think that is the thing that makes the most sense, because the first thing they said was the proper channels weren't taken. And Lou was like, yes, they were. We have the document that shows it. It's just this last step. They said that we were supposed to see it, the PR group, before it went out. But Lou argues that no, that is nowhere in our directive, that we have to pass it through them. And so certainly there are some concerns there that seem to be shading things. So I guess time will tell when it comes to that. But I mean, it's kind of a very tiny point, because the point is the videos are out.
The videos are out, and if you're right, if we're right in thinking that they're feeling burned by this, I don't think there's a very good chance of more videos coming out unless, like you said, Congress gets involved and they say release it. So I'm not expecting anything soon, but hopefully there's more stuff out there that we're going to see on the History Channel show. I hope. I know I'm sure they all had to sign NDAs for that show, and that's part of the reason they can't talk about certain stuff. But another thing, you know what this is missing? We're missing a female. Nobody at TTSA has come out. Nobody connected to ATIP. No females. That's why I think the female pilot who was providing cover for Fravor, her experience is written down in one of the reports. It's really detailed. If she ever came out, and I know she wants nothing to do with this from what I heard, but if she ever came out, I think it would be really important to have a female energy brought to this. What do you think?
Oh, I agree with that a gazillion billion, I agree with that wholeheartedly. In fact, it's funny you bring it up, because I've been thinking about it a lot lately. It's been a while since I've had a woman on the show, and I feel really guilty about that. I grew up hanging out in a household where it was mostly women, my sisters and my mom. Here the girls have gone off to school, but my girlfriend's girls I've lived with essentially, and And so I'm used to being around women, and I don't feel comfortable when it's just men, to be honest. And that is something that is severely lacking. Now, a lot of what I do, luckily because Karen, my girlfriend's into this stuff, who runs the Congress, so she comes with me. So, which is helpful because then we get to know also the wives. So I've gotten to know the wives of some of the Bigelow people. We get along really well with Lou and his wife. So, and that's another interesting aspect is to hear what they have to say. And what's funny is I've heard a lot from wives, and I've never talked about that because they do verify some of this stuff, and they do have interesting stories that lend to the credibility of their husbands. But I can't share them because they're always like, don't say anything because their wives, they don't want any attention, and and especially the husbands, especially with Bigelow having received so much negativity and Lou, that they don't want any negative attention to their spouses. So it's always like, okay, they're always, don't tell anybody about what she says. Don't talk about this.
I can't blame them. I'd love to hear the stories, but I can't blame them. Who can blame them after you see the way people come at you so hard? I mean, people have come at Elizondo and DeLong and Mel and anybody. It's just like, they're so angry that this is going on. It's like, and we all speculate, well, it's because they've been doing, I remember somebody said, why did he get UFO Research of the Year? I've been doing this for a long time. I should get that award. It's like, they're so upset that somebody new is getting all the attention. I think that's part of it. That's a big part of it. But yeah, I don't blame wives. It's really interesting you bring up wives and their stories because that's confirmation. Unless you want to say, well, the wives are lying. The wives are lying too. They're just protecting their husbands, which I'm sure people would say. But yeah, I don't blame them for wanting to stay out of the spotlight and not be quoted on the record.
Well, that's why I've been really curious to speak to them too, to say, were you aware of this? A lot of times I expect if there's any deception, then them to kind of roll their eyes, or some sort of like them getting frustrated, or even if they just don't want to get into it, saying I'd rather not say anything, but that's not the case. Usually they are like, here's my experience, and they have these very interesting stories that essentially do corroborate with what their husbands say, but more than that, show that they've had they've essentially have been involved. They've had experiences that are interesting and interesting stories to share related to all of it. So, it's really interesting, and it's too bad we don't have that female aspect, and that's probably why, because these men's spouses aren't getting involved. But like you said, who can blame them when they just get beat up like crazy? What's been nice is that, and I want to know if you have felt this since you've gotten involved, is that certainly people beat me up like crazy when I finally was like, after the WikiLeaks, I was like, oh my gosh, Tom's been telling me he's doing something important. I've been skeptical, but he is. This is amazing. Nobody has had a sit-down meeting with people at this high of level to talk about UFOs. That's why we gave him the award. If anybody else would have done that, they would have got the award, but Tom did it. And that's when I was all in, like, wow, he's doing something significant we need to watch. And people were bashing me, they were really negative. But that seems to change as time goes on, as, we get more and more great information and more of what they've told us is being confirmed, or at least what Lou has been saying. Have you seen kind of a tide change? Have people become more accepting of TTSA and everybody, you think?
I've seen a few people start to change their tune. I mean, they're still skeptical. They're also upset that it's on History Channel. And as Bob Kvyat of the alien autopsy fame said at MegaCon, we need to get this to CBS News. I mean, yeah, of course I want it to be on 60 Minutes and a 8-piece investigative, series with all news investigative journalists looking at that. But right now, this is what we have. We don't have that. We have History Channel. And yeah, I've seen people open their minds saying, okay, I listened to Elizondo. I met him at the SCU conference, and I gotta say, yeah, he's really a nice guy, and he really comes across as believable. I mean, I'm still skeptical, but meeting him in person really changed my opinion on him. So I'm seeing that. I personally, I'm not as visible as you, but on Twitter, I haven't gotten too much negativity. People leave me alone for, I don't know why. Facebook's a little different, but Twitter, I haven't really gotten a lot of negative feedback. I mean, maybe that'll change as this ramps up, but I've been really fortunate on that front. And hopefully in May, late May, when the show airs, Unidentified on History, that more people will say, okay, there's obviously something going on, or I'm open-minded to see what TTSA has in store. And as Knapp said, even if they don't do anything more than helping get those 3 videos released or having a part in that, he goes, even that, if they disappeared after that, it would still be a great accomplishment that helped change things for us.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the reasons, and I think this helps me too, because I get less bashing than a lot of people out there. And I think it's just sticking to the facts and sticking to the information, staying focused is what you're doing. You're posting helpful information. You're not making, strong claims or saying you're sharing the information to let people determine on their own. And I think that's why people appreciate it and are less likely to kind of come after people like that.
I agree. And in the old days, I wasn't like that. When I first started, I was like, no, they're extraterrestrial. They're extraterrestrial. And I had a friend who was a big time skeptic, and he would always hammer me, and it forced me to really improve on my debating skills. And over the years, I'm like, that really helped me out. And I appreciate having that person back then. At the time, I didn't appreciate it, but now I do. And it's like, now I'm like, I will not say that. I'm like, yeah, I don't think you should rule out extraterrestrial, but we don't know what they are. There's so many possibilities. If you want to speculate, I'll speculate all day long about what they could be, but I do not know. And when people come and say, listen, they're extraterrestrial, they are. I'm like, yeah, I can't say that. I'm sorry. I'll leave it alone and just say, I'll disagree. I'll agree to disagree right now.
That's funny because I get the same thing. And it's funny because people in the field, you experience this, I'm sure, they assume that that's how you feel. I mean, when you're approaching, they begin to talk to you, they assume that you're on board, that, this is all aliens and abduction and all of this.
Right.
And I have to tell them, well, I don't know that for sure. I mean, maybe.
Exactly. And somebody the other day, it was great. They go, listen, the big problem I have with this whole UFO stuff is I don't think they can get here from there. And I go, well, how do you know they're coming from anywhere? How do you know they haven't been here for tens of thousands of years? They don't have to go anywhere. And he said,
right.
I guess that defeats my argument. I'm like, yeah, I'm not saying that's the case, but, we don't know where they're coming from at all.
Yeah.
At least I don't.
So on your website, I guess, what is the biggest deal right now? Like if someone was like, hey, I heard you have a website, I got a few minutes later today to look at it. What should I look at? What would you tell someone?
I'd say take a look at the notes / transcript of the Nimitz case with those 4 witnesses. That was one of my favorite. I hadn't been to a UFO conference in a while, and I had so much fun at that conference meeting those guys. And some of the transcripts I've done for me, and also I have a Lazar article up there. It's been a couple of months with Eric Davis. That was one of my favorite articles to write because I went back and looked at every argument that George and Jeremy had made in favor of Lazar, and I looked and I went and tried to see if there was any other counterpoint to that, and I found some. And that article is really good because Eric Davis is 100% anti-Lazar. He thinks he's full of it, and you'll see that in the article. And
another thing that I loved when you did this story too, and that Davis got his word out there, and I've asked, about this, because what's interesting about this is that these are all TTSA guys, essentially. Eric Davis is working with To the Stars. They're all Bigelow people, all ATIP people, but they disagree. George, of course, is not in these organizations, but he's very friendly with all of the people and knows them. However, you've got people who are in there, some who believe in Lazar and some who don't. So you've got this interesting dynamic where, this is a topic not all of them agree on. And then you have Eric Davis coming out making some very strong statements. And I've said, you guys have to, has Lazar ever come up? And if he has, it's probably been some pretty interesting conversations. And I got this look like, oh, yeah.
That's why I asked Reed about Lazar, because I was curious what his take was on it.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, he was neutral, open-minded. But another thing, Eric Davis recently said that, we keep hearing ATIP, 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 and I don't focus on the negative or the contradictions, but Eric Davis said, yeah, ATIP wasn't the name. It was just a nickname that Harry Reid pulled out of thin air when he wrote that letter to William Lynn. So it's like, oh, really?
See, and that's not necessarily true. And then here's though the deal, and here's why I say this, is because I've been really focused on this, on clarifying that, and I just got to interview Lou recently on this to clarify. And it's kind of funny because he feels like, I can't speak for what everybody else says. And he's even had a couple mistakes when he's talked about this. But here we go. I'll share this right now. And I haven't shared this yet with my interview on him. So here's the details. Essentially what happened is there was OSAP. OSAP was created, ran by Lou's predecessor. It was focused on all of the paranormal. As George and Lou have told us, over time, these religious factions started, and others started coming at them. And like, you can't do this, you can't do this. So there was a decision made early on to create ATIP. And I don't know who created the name. I didn't ask that, but maybe I'll go back and see if I can find that out. But then this was kind of a subgroup to focus just on UFOs and just military cases. And they thought that this would be more palatable to people out there, which it was. Then, so over time, this was kind of Lou's focus. As time went on, the OSAP part had to die, essentially, because, these religious factions and stuff were not going to tolerate it. Right. But ATIP continued, and then the name officially changed when Lou took over, or about that time, later on. There's a timeline there. So then that's when ATIP officially took over as the name. So ATIP was a name out there. Maybe it was Harry Reid who came up with it. But it wasn't, what Lou says, it wasn't technically official as a name until Harry Reid wrote that document. So I could see why some people would be shocked, or that, I could see why Eric Davis would be shocked, because he knew the program as OSAP, and all of a sudden Harry Reid is calling it ATIP. And that was the first time they really just, after Harry Reid did that, decided we're just sticking with ATIP then. And
that's really interesting. I did not know that. It makes a lot of sense. Just,
Yeah, because there's a lot of confusion. I'm like, Lou, these people are confused. People are saying stuff different. And he's like, unfortunately, I can't speak to what they knew or what they're saying. But that's what happened. But here's my argument. This is why I don't think it's a deception, and I'd like to hear your opinion. And sorry for going off. We're supposed to be interviewing you.
No, that's new information that nobody knows about.
But Lou was an administrator, and I've made this argument. Everybody has their role. The expert opinion, the official, the person we need to talk to about the name of the program would be Lou, Harry Reid, and some aspects, but especially Lou and his predecessor. They were in the DIA. They were, or DOD. Lou was OSD. They were the people who worked on the administrative end of things, so they would know. Eric Davis, Hal Puthoff, they are contractors, so they won't know. In fact, I think it was Hal who said, or others have said, I don't even know the name of the program when I'm writing papers I'm contracted for with the government sometimes, because I don't care. They're like, hey, we need you to write a paper on this or do this work, and they do it. So that's why they would be fuzzy about the naming of what was named when. Right. And then, and with the New York Times, as Lou puts it, I wasn't on OSAP. I never worked on OSAP. I was, brought in, worked on ATIP. It wasn't my program, so I wasn't going to speak to something I didn't have the authority to speak on. I had the authority to speak on ATIP, so I spoke on ATIP, and nobody knew about OSAP at the time. And you'll notice there's a trend that a lot of these topics we didn't know about, or Lou didn't talk about, he doesn't talk about until the existence of whatever it is leaked. Exactly. And it's mostly George Knapp getting these leaks, and he got a lot of these from Washington, presumably from Harry Reid. We don't know, and he's not sharing who leaked this information to him. But once it's leaked, like OSAP is leaked, okay, now Lou can talk about OSAP because it's been leaked, it existed.
Right, and yeah, exactly. I don't see it as deception either. I mean, sometimes I hear stuff, I'm like, oh, that contradicts that, but it's like, overall, when you hear Eric Davis and he on the main most important stuff about UFOs and all the details surrounding that, he's on board. He doesn't contradict anything anybody else says. And it's funny because the same thing happened with the remote viewing program.
Exactly. It's so cool you bring this up.
I remember at the time it happened. It's like, yeah, there was a religious faction, and if you watch Third Eye Spies, Joe McMonagle said some member of Congress came up to him and said, "You're doing the work of the devil." And then another one came up to him and said, "You're doing the work of God." He goes, "I don't know which one scared me more."
Exactly. That's so funny that you brought that up because when I was talking to Lou, I've been telling him you need to watch Third Eye Blind, or the new documentary Third Eye Spies. Of course, I've been writing about all this forever because Jim Marrs wrote a book. I've been able to interview Joe McGonigal and everything, but that was a great documentary because it kind of highlighted Hal's career through all of this, and that's what I really liked about it because he's so pertinent right now. He's the guy on the scene. But yes, Hal's been through all this before, and it also demonstrates that Hal is not some kind of spy releasing manipulating us, because he has been working his whole career in looking into kind of these fringe sciences and trying to promote their usage and research his whole career. So this is a continuation of what he's been doing for many, many years.
Yeah, people say, well, these CIA people, all of them have been involved in this for such a long time. It's the same group of characters. I think Kvyat makes that argument. I'm like, yeah, because where is Hal Puthoff going to go work and as a full-time job and do investigations into psychic, remote viewing? There's not a lot of places he can go. So if our government's open to it and they're willing to pay him to do it, of course he's going to do it.
Right.
Same for a lot of these people. It's like, so of course you're going to see the same names working in the same small government circles. As far as I know, there's not a lot of places you can go and work full time looking into, psychic functioning. I mean, I know some people have been able to do it, like Dean Radin. He's done work over the years, but it's not a surprise to me at all that Hal, and I don't understand how people have that. He's another likable guy. He's been, as an older guy, he's been around for a long time. He seems always open when he speaks about it, and I don't understand. I don't understand the real skepticism that he's, once again, like you said, he's some disinformation guy. I don't,
Yeah, they're missing all of the facts, and that's why I recommend people, if you want to know more about Hal, go watch Third Eye Spies, which is on Netflix or something like that. I think it's $5 or something. It's well worth it because the remote viewing program was extraordinary and it was fascinating, and there are so many parallels to what we're learning about OSAP and ATIP that it's just an extremely important set of information.
And it's funny because there are a lot of people who are open-minded about UFOs. Yes, this is legitimate. And then I bring up remote viewing and like, yeah, there's nothing to remote viewing. I'm sorry. I'm like, have you tried it? Because I've taken classes. I took a class with Lynn Buchanan. I took a class with Prudence Calabrese, who was controversial, but she taught remote viewing, and I did it, and I got results. They were real basic results, but they were results that were specific little details that would pop up out of nowhere. So I would tell people, try it for yourself. I mean, the controlled remote viewing manual is online that the military used. You can learn it. It's not that difficult. Try it and impress yourself. Don't be skeptical of something if you haven't tried it. And it's like there's this wall. Some people will accept UFOs, but they won't accept remote viewing. And there's other topics, the same thing. It's like, nope, sorry, it's too far out there. But look at the evidence. And I think the evidence for remote viewing is impressive.
Yeah. Yep. Really interesting stuff. We're essentially out of time. So let's see what you're working on. You're working on transcribing the SCU, AEPC, all of these acronyms, the conference in Alabama, and I'm proud to have, I've been working with SCU from the beginning, and I think that conference went excellent, and it was so nice for Lou and Hal to be there because they got to see that there are, serious people in the UFO field who have been in the UFO field for decades, just kind of lurking out there and doing their work. Keeping their nose to the grindstone type of thing, that don't get as much attention because they're working, and they don't have anything bombastic to say. They're working on science and facts and figures. So that was great. But in this transcript, I guess, kind of a preview of maybe what people have to look forward to. What are some of the big pieces from that transcript that you think are significant?
With Lou's transcript? Yeah, I need to go through it again. It's so long. It's just there's so much information in there between his transcript, the George Knapp transcript that I'll be posting tonight, and the Harry Reid transcript. Those are just, and the Reid one is not very long, but it's just there's just so much information for people between Elizondo and Reid that were in there. They were in the know, and it's just I can't get enough of, like I said, of Elizondo speaking about how I know a lot of people don't care about how the program started, what they analyzed, and what they investigated, but I'm one of those people that I want to read up on everything. And Elizondo, I think it was like an hour, maybe an hour. No, it was like over 2 hours, I think it was. So it's like if you want to learn about ATIP and OSAP and what went on and the history, read that transcript. That'll be my most important transcript as far as preserving that transcript historically for people to go back and look at that, for people who don't have time to watch the whole video. And the Reid transcript will be up there probably today, and I was just going to keep doing what I'm doing, just trying to put everything together for the people who are really, I really want to connect with mainstream, and a lot of mainstream people are not going to be interested in these minute details. So I just need to figure out a way to get. I think the show will help because that is perfect for mainstream. New York Times article has helped. I just think it's a matter of time. We just need to be patient, as Elizondo always preaches. It's like patience, have patience, and I do have patience, and I've been doing this for a long time. So I'm over the next couple of years, I think more and more will come out, and hopefully, if Congress gets behind this, then people will finally wake up. Can you imagine how the news is going to cover this if Congress actually has hearings on this again?
Yeah,
and we have pilots coming forward, allowed to speak about it for not fear of losing their flying license to be able to fly. It's like, imagine all the pilots from the gimbal coming forward talking about, spear, cubes with spear, up close. Jeremy Corbell said at MegaCon they were close to these jets. In fact, David Fravor said there was a near miss where it almost hit one of our jets. So I think that would really get the attention of the world if that happens.
I agree. Super exciting. And I want to say you're doing a really great service, because when it comes to the mainstream, quotes and sources are paramount, and it's important to tell them, so-and-so said this, so-and-so said that. Otherwise, they're going to assume that you're speculating or assuming. But when you quote the major players, especially a Harry Reid, but also a scientist, someone who worked in the Pentagon, that's what's really important. And that's what's really important about what you're doing, because you'll notice when I have a really great story like George Knapp, where there's just so rich, full of quotes that I need to pull, I'll do a transcript. I did a transcript of Luis Elizondo, but I can't get to all of these. And so what you're doing is so important, because then we can go find exactly what they said and have the exact quote. So what you're doing is just invaluable. And thank you so much for just getting out there.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Alejandro. And hopefully one day I'll learn how to type a little faster so it doesn't take me 5 days. I mean, Elizondo has taken a long time. So, yeah, I appreciate it. I'll keep at it.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. We'll definitely have you back again, because this story is not going away. And as you just mentioned, it's just going to get better and better as we learn more and more. And apparently we're going to learn a lot more in the History Channel show. And so that's going to be really exciting. What I'm getting excited about, because we're working on releasing some of the names for the International UFO Congress, is that our Congress is going to be after the show, and we're going to have, some of the people involved with this at the Congress. So we're going to be able to share information and get more information about some of what we learned in the History Channel show. So that's going to be really exciting. And I hope you can come.
Oh, I hope to be there. I cannot wait for the show and for the Congress, and for the next year or two. It's going to be, I'm excited. I haven't been this excited in a long time, and I appreciate you having me on the show. And look forward to seeing what the future holds for us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for UFO Joe Murgia for being on the show. Check him out at ufojoe.net. That's ufojoe.net. So he's doing some really good stuff there. As we talked about throughout the show, some of the transcripts and stuff that he's doing. So he's definitely someone that you're going to want to check out. You can also find him on Twitter. Twitter is kind of where a lot of us are sharing some up-to-the-minute information. So you will find him on Twitter as UFO Joe 11. You can also search him by name Joe Murgia. So you'll find Danny up there and Mike DeMonte, some of the people I've interviewed. So a lot of fun, a lot of really, really good stuff. So this is really exciting. More and more news is coming out. I have a couple Den of Geek articles with some of the background that we've discussed about TTSA and ATIP and all of that stuff, and Tom DeLonge. Essentially getting ready for this show to come out. I just really want to make sure the public is as informed about all of the details as possible, making sure where credit is given to. I really want people to know if it wasn't for Tom DeLonge, none of this would have happened. This information wouldn't have gotten out. So I have a story that's outlining how he made all this come about. Even though I've written about that in the past, this is kind of new and updated and just about that single topic. And then I have another one that will be coming out essentially about how, ATIP was a lot more at the beginning. It was this OSAP, and it was this, paranormal investigation to begin with. So I have an article coming out on that as well. And I'll keep on writing about all of this. So lots of exciting projects happening. So check Joe out. Otherwise, the UFO Congress, like I said, there's more and more information coming out about the Congress. So be sure to go to ufocongress.com and you can check out more. I'll tell you right now, if you click around there, you're going to find some new information, even though we haven't really launched it all yet. We will be in the next few days. And then also, follow the social media. Go to UFO Congress on Twitter and Facebook. And then you can also, on the front page of ufocongress.com, join the email list. And right now, I think I told you guys this last time, we're having problems with the Open Minds email. It all got changed up, and we're kind of a sub email of a larger company. So there's some problems there. So really right now, the UFO Congress is the best email list to get onto, so you could get your email newsletter on everything that we're up to, because I do post that stuff at the UFO Congress website as well and put that in the email. So if you want to keep up to speed, go ahead and do that. So we'll be letting you know about a lot more that way coming up here soon. Otherwise, do please go to my Patreon. You'll see a link down below in the show notes, or you can also just go to Patreon and look for Alejandro Rojas, and you'll find me. Patreon spelled Patreon. So I hope you'll consider going on and becoming a member for $1. Only $1 a month, and I'll be sure to get you lots of exclusive, great information, and especially allow you to ask questions. So send me some questions that I can ask the guests. That's kind of a cool service, right? Plus, it helps me manage, so I'm not getting these questions from all over the place. But that way we can interact more, become more of a community, and you can help me out so I can keep doing this stuff, because I would like to keep doing it if possible, Anyway, thank you all for listening. I want to really thank some of the people I usually thank. I want to thank Caleb Hanks for the opening and close music. I want to thank Systematics for the bumper music. Of course, I want to thank you, the listener, for being here. Once again, we have another great show. Physicist Dr. Eric Davis. This is going to be really, really good stuff coming up next week, so be sure to be here. Otherwise, until next time, adios, muchachos.
Your emotion